thank you all for tuning in. Yes, we have made it through the week. We're getting through. We're getting through as fast as possible. And, I just like to start off with my, podcast as you all been listening to my podcast. I like to start it off by saying that if you are going through anything, it doesn't matter what it is, only you know what it is that you are going through. I hope and pray that you make it through and it works out the way that you want it to work out in the end, and you rise victorious and you overcome whatever obstacles or whatever thing, anything that that you're going through, and it works out in your favor in the end. Yes, in the end. And you are now listening to the Creative Lips podcast. And I am your host, Regina. Yes, I am your host, Regina, and you are tuning in with Self-Care Wednesdays. Yes, Self-Care Wednesdays. Yes, thank you for tuning in. Once again, we are going to, be talking about, some steps and some tips to get you through whatever you need in self-care. Just like I said, every Wednesdays, I always do a self-check. A self-check, because we need to, check in with ourselves just to make sure that we straight. You know what I'm saying? That we straight. We have to do that. Some people do it on a daily basis. I do it like within the middle of the week, just to make sure that I'm straight, that I'm okay. I do those self-tips and, those self-care things that I need to do with myself. And I know I also want to say that, people always ask me, what is the music that I'm playing? Because I never post, none of the artists and stuff and some of the songs that I, just feel as though is dope, that I've been listening to over a decade. A lot of music, very musically inclined person. The song that is playing is by Deborah Bond, and it's from off of her album called The Day After, and this song is called A Message. I love Deborah Bond. Yo, if y'all not down, listen to Deborah Bond. So I'm going to be doing that by now, just letting y'all know. But however, we're going to get into, let's get into it right now. We're going to get into, some of the steps. The topic that I'm going to be talking about today is about 5 steps on how not to stay upset about anything. Now, I want to get into this disclaimer. Yes, this is a disclaimer that I always like to say, before I start my podcast too. I like to say that this episode, these Self-Care Wednesdays, are only for entertainment purposes only. Yes, only for entertainment purposes only. And by no means, no shape, no form that I am a licensed psychologist or a licensed therapist. This is strictly from my opinion and from my experience. So I wanted to just put that once again out there in the universe and let you all know about that. So I'm going to begin to talk about the 5 steps on how not to stay upset about anything, no matter what it is. Now, anger is a natural emotion. It's a natural emotional response to being hurt or wronged by someone else. And that's why it is important for us to work through, to work through it when it arises. It can even help us to be better, and it can also help us to assess ourselves in any given situation that has prompted us to do so. Unfortunately, some people hold on to their anger for longer than they need to, instead of processing it and learning from it. When you remain angry at someone, you know, come on, let's be honest about that shit. Let's keep it 100 right now. When you become angry at someone, you're really hurting yourself, right? Anger is tied to a number of health issues that can harm you over time if anger is left unsolved. And in addition to these risks, staying angry doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't impact another person, nor does it give it change in any way or shape or form. So now let's get into those steps as to, how can we combat, how can we diffuse, how can we stop being angry, and being upset. Okay, the number one step is to think before you speak. Right now, some of us it's kind of hard. I know in my past, oh my God, it was definitely hard for me to, think before I say, before I just say any damn thing, because of anger or because of whatever that person did to me, said to me, or whatever the situation is in, at hand. I never thought before I spoke, or reacted. Because see, people often jump to conclusions when they are angry. And, they often say the first thing that comes to your fucking mind. You know what I'm saying? And often, the first thing that comes to your mind is unkind. Because sometimes people can say some shit. I know I definitely, back in my past, I would say some shit. It's the first thing that will pop up into my mind. I would say some shit, and we try to stop, and listen before we reacting. But, when in the heat of anger, in the heat of passion, or whatever the case may be, we say it. It's best to then take the time to think carefully about how you want to reply. Okay, easier said than done when it is a situation that is at hand that we can't, I guess, stop ourselves. It's all about accountability. It's all about being in self-control. The times that we can combat this is if somebody says some shit out their mouth or do something, the first thing that we can do is just walk away. I don't know if y'all seen, different situations where people just walk away. And then people said, no, don't run away from the problem. Don't run away from the situation. Stop running. Sometimes it's best to just let them go, or let yourself go. Excuse yourself from that conversation or situation. And then you can make a promise to them that you will come back later and finish that discussion or try to assess that situation. by giving yourself, some time. You have to give yourself time. You have to give yourself time to assess the situation that is at hand, that is in front of you, that's in front of your face. You have to give yourself time. You have to walk away. Now, if that person don't let you walk away, then now that's another situation, another topic, once again, for me to talk about on another day. But however, if, by all means, walk away from that discussion and tell them that you will finish it later. Because by doing this, you're reassessing and getting into yourself to look at the situation that provoked you from a different, more positive perspective. Okay? So now, if you do that, that would be beneficial for you to do that. So ask yourself these questions, okay? Now, these questions that you can ask yourself once you, excuse yourself from that situation. Did he or she really mean what I think I heard them say out their fucking mouth? Am I assuming something that needs to be verified? You really need to assess what they just said out their mouth. It could be anything. I'm not going to even give you any situations because I'm quite sure you all know what those situations are that needs to be verified. Ask yourself this too. Is this situation as terrible as it feels right now? Am I possibly exaggerating, its significance, or am I taking it too seriously? Am I taking this situation, to the 10th power? Am I taking it, am I being big mad right now?
So fucking motherfucker.
Is my emotions of this person being unfair to me, or more of a reflection on myself? Am I being biased than the other person's trying to take advantage of me? Or are there interests or concerns, maybe just as important or legitimate to them as mine are to me? Like, we have to challenge ourselves. We have to challenge ourselves. Is it a righteous matter for me to stand up and to voice my opinion and for me to speak out at that given moment and that given time? And it could also be, too, that this person is hard at taking criticism. So, once you sit down and once you reassess all of those things, then, it could be very beneficial for you to just take a breathe, take a breather, take a moment and really get in tune with what it is, in fact, that's really, really going on in that situation so that you can learn, and you can, it would be very helpful to help you not stay upset, in that situation. All right. So now let's move on to number 2. Now, be healthy. Now, we need to be healthy, in staying upset. Because when a situation triggers an intense anger, it can be hard to deal with the immediate aftermath of everything. Now, anger and stress impacts the chemicals in your brain. Now, for all who don't know that shit, it affects and alters your frame of mind. It affects you, really, really bad. It also changes the way your brain and body functions. For example, now, when you're angry, you tend to have, a faster heartbeat. Your breathing is fast. You be breathing. You just, get all up in your feelings. And of course you get high blood pressure. Being angry can also impact the circulation in the blood throughout your entire body. So over time, that built up stress can impact your heart, your brain, and, just like I said, with the rest of your body as it breaks down into the presence of these chemicals in your body. How to combat it. Now, this is how we can combat it. How can we combat it? And now, here is some quick coping methods that can help you manage your anger in the heat of the moment. Now, the things that we can do, we can, work it out, meaning we can work out our physical, our physical elements within our body. That time that I said before in number 1, that we can walk away and excuse ourselves. We can take that time and assess, and we can go for a walk. We can go to the gym. We can even work out in our home. Because it is stated that physical exercise comes with a host of health benefits. Getting out and about can boost your mood, relieve stress, and get your mind off of the things you're angry about to begin with. Because regular physical exercise can help you decompress. It can help you decompress, just like I said, burn off those calories and lose weight. Because burning off that extra tension can reduce the stress that you feel angry, and help relieve some of those outbursts. I remember back in the day, this is a crazy story, because I had been through a lot of shit in my life. As you all have been listening to my podcast, I shared some things with you all that I have been through in my life. And, of course, attributing to some of those things that I've been through in my life, I had an anger problem. I had a really, really bad anger problem. Like, I would tear up shit, man. I really did, And, I had, throughout the years, it took me some time to overcome my anger issues. Of course I had to seek help. And that's the thing, never be afraid to seek help. Seek, medical attention, or seek, to talk to someone in regards to that. Because I used to have outbursts. I used to, go through, the turmoil of it in the aftermath, and I would have to suffer the consequences. Thank God that, some of the situations that I've been through, just like I said, I used to tear shit up to where I could have got arrested, but thank God I didn't. The universe was protecting me, throughout all of those situations and all of those, ordeals that I've been through in my life. We really have to sit down and really assess, what it is, in fact, that is this really worth it? Is it really worth it for me to be big mad, for me to really go there? Is it really worth it? It's not really worth it for us to, take it to the extreme in certain instances. It's really not. Because it could be, causing our freedom to not even be here, to see the next day in certain situations, Because, another thing too, meditation is another effective strategy that you can use to manage anger. Because it's been said that meditation helps you learn to control your thoughts. It clears your head, and it also relaxes your body. And you may get some people out there and say, I don't meditate. I don't get that shit. I don't know how to do that shit. I don't want to do that shit. But if you maybe, just maybe, try something new, you never know how beneficial it will be for you. Because in addition to it, by practicing meditation, it can help you learn how to take your thoughts off of any given situation if you learn, if you even just try. And also, it'll help you take your thoughts off the person who hurt you and transform them into something that will be released over time if you practice it over time. All right? So, try to do those things. Try to, work on being healthy. And when any situation that triggers you with that intense anger, try to work on it, guys. Really. All right. So number 3, don't dwell. That's one thing that we always do. We always dwell on it. We always dwell on that shit. I mean, it depends on whatever the situation, whatever triggered you to be, upset. Whatever triggered you to be upset, we dwell on it for days, sometimes months, sometimes years for some. People hold on to grudges. Those grudge holders, they, I was one of them, I would hold on to many of grudges. I would take them with me to bed, take them with me everywhere I go, like I'm carrying a bag, each and every day. But now, some people have a tendency to keep, rehashing it over and over again, the incident that made them upset, but to be honest, it can be an unproductive strategy. We think that, we're, putting this in our daily routine, but it can be very unproductive, to be honest, because especially if you have already resolved that issue, within yourself, you don't even talk to that person anymore, that angered you in the first place. Instead, try to let go of the past incident, by doing this, is to focus instead on the things that you appreciate about the person. Now, I know some of you say that it's hard for me to do that shit because that person wronged me so bad. It's really hard for me to do that. I can honestly say that it was hard for me to do that. It was hard for me to let go and to focus on the good things about that person that hurt me. But sometimes we have to do that because we can't dwell on it. Or we can just take it all the way around by just not thinking about that person at all. Just by not thinking about that person at all. That made us angry, whatever situation that made us angry. And then we can also avoid, words like never or always, when talking about yourself or others. Because statements like that never works. It never works, when we're dwelling on, the past. It never works. And another statement like, you're always forgetting things, things that make you feel your anger is justified, like, for instance, that statement, you're always forgetting things, like, you're in the heat of a situation, you're talking to someone, and you leave that situation. And then a statement pops up in your mind like, damn, I'm always forgetting to say things. Damn, I could have said this. I could have said that. Damn. It's just never going to work when you're dwelling on it. You're dwelling on it. It's never going to be justified, even if you said it, even if you remember to say it. Because such statements, also alienate people who might otherwise be willing to work with you on a solution. So, we have to use the logic. We have to use our mind, even when it is justified. Say like you do, say what you wanted to say. Even when it's justified, anger can quickly be irrational. You said what you said, but was it really worth you saying it? We have to remind ourselves that the world is not out to get you. And that's one thing that I had to learn too. Because when I was dwelling on the past, dwelling on all of the fuckery, dwelling on all of the shit, I had to keep on telling myself that everyone is not out there to get you. Everyone is not out there to sabotage you. That's not in their intention. That is not in their, way of thinking to dwell, on it over and over and over and over again. That these people are out there to ruin my life. We have to do this each time that we start feeling angry. And if we do this each and every time, to not dwell on the past and, give ourselves these different strategies to, to not, self-doubt ourselves, have that self-talk, with ourselves, to check in with ourselves, then, it'll have us, creating more balance in our life and having a better perspective on things if we stop dwelling on the past. All right. So now number 4, recognize what gets you upset. We have to really know our triggers. That's one thing that we have to know. We have to learn what angers us. What angers us? What is it? What it is, in fact, that angers us? What gets us, teed off? Maybe you expected your best friend to support you, but they didn't. That could be one of the things. It could be many of things. Only you know what ticks you off. What pushes your buttons enough and often enough that you could flip into a state of anger with even knowing why you got upset in the first place. We need to recognize and avoid those triggers. We need to give some thought to the things that makes us upset. We really have to sit down and really analyze it. Because if we know what gets us angry, then it would be very helpful for us to avoid being angry at anything, no matter what it is. Because many people remain angry because they don't know what else to do. That's the end result into being angry. That's the only thing that we all know what to do. Some of us, majority of us. That's the end result. It's to just be angry. I'm just going to be angry. I don't care. I'm just going to be upset. I'm just going to be upset right now. That's the only thing that we know how to do. But however, like anything else in life, there is always a solution. There is always a solution to it. to any problem in your life. You know, people say, you know, you might say, no, it's not. I'm just going to stay mad. There is a solution to it, to not be mad at it. Because when you feel angry, you take some time to sit down and figure out what you can do about your anger and the situation that led up to it. Because if you do it, it's better to use that anger in a productive way. Right? If we do that. So channel that energy into a positive action. Also, what your anger may be hiding can also be a lot deeper than what you see and feel. It could also be a situational awareness of your life, and what you are going through at the moment can also be a big impact on how you're feeling right now too. That's why we have to sit down and really think about what are the triggers that's making us angry. Why are we angry right now? You know, I remember there's one situation in my life that I talk about before. I talked about, I have a YouTube channel. And for those who don't know, yes, I have a YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel, I talk about my personal journey through my music career and, you know, about vintage fashion and, you know, things that I love and everything about Gina Lock Soul. For those who don't know, that's my stage name, Gina Lock Soul. And I, you know, talked about, I had to share the video about how I got fired. I recently got fired from my day job. Yeah, so, you know, that situation was crazy because getting fired, you know, I never got fired in my life. Never got fired in my life. And, you know, getting fired, it was like really shocking to me. And that whole situation was over, you know, miscommunication, inadequate training, and, you know, and with one employee, it got a little heated. It did. And it got heated to the point to where the manager had to escort the other employee out the room, you know, because it got heated. Because I said some things and she said some things, and it just wasn't productive. You know, we didn't get anywhere, you know, because in the end result, you know, I was the one being fired, you know, over, you know, what they said, quote unquote, lack of work, you know, ethic. You know, my work wasn't up to their standards, so they let me go. And in my YouTube video, you know, I also said that that out of 100%, 40%, I can honestly say that 40%, you know, was my fault. But, you know, the 60%, of course, you know, just like I said, it was inadequate training, you know, because I was being trained by one person, you know, that I had, you know, the disagreement with, and then trained by another person, which was the manager. And I had to teach myself two different styles of training. So, you know, over time, I meshed those trainings in, and, you know, and then it just, you know, turned into, you know, what it is, in fact, for me to not do the things that they asked for me to do. And you know, I stayed mute, you know, I stayed quiet on, you know, I did ask questions, I did seek help, you know, but it was said to me by the employee that, you know, I had a falling out with, that, you know, she told me, you know, don't say anything, you know, because, you know, they, you know, had a previous fallout with the previous employee. So I just stayed quiet because, I didn't want to disturb anything. I didn't want to cause tension. I didn't want to, have the same situation that happened all over again for the other employee that was there. Now, that other employee quit because they wasn't offering her what she wanted to, what she needed. And it's sad because they hired me in there after her, and they gave me everything that they didn't give her, which was unfortunate. So I'm learning this from this employee, and she's telling me all of this, and then I'm sitting there, and then I felt complacent. So, outside of all of that, let's get it, I'm rambling on, but I guess it's just that I'm just venting about that, because that's one of the things that, it's part of, not staying upset about it, because, I can stay angry about that. I can stay upset about that. I can, let that fester in me and, react in a way to where that is once again, not productive, and, going back to it, I don't really want to talk about it again, but going back to it, I recognize what got me upset. And during that whole, meeting, and, I had to calm myself down because it triggered me, because it was things that was said that triggered me. I'm the type of person, I guess anyone would be like this. They don't like to be lied on or whatever the case may be. But, we have to find what triggers us. We have to find what gets us upset. We have to sit down and analyze those things and write them down and, and rehearse them even. We really have to do those things, and that would help us and support us and aid us into, channeling that energy back into, just like I said again, into a positive action. And, that would help us. That would really help us. All right. So now getting into number 5, last but not least, learn how to move on from that shit and let it go. Okay. Now we need to learn how to move on. Because if you think about it, if you stay in a relationship with someone that hurts you, right? Do you think that it is going to be beneficial for you to heal and to learn from it and to overcome it? It is important to take some time and think about whether or not that's a good idea. You really need to think about it. Now, there are times when a relationship can bounce back from issues. Whether relationship, it could be, now I'm talking about, when I say relationship, it could be anything. It could be with your significant other, your partner. It could be with a friend. It could be with your manager. It could be with anything. Sometimes they can bounce back from it. But that doesn't always mean that they should. Now, and when I say that, it doesn't mean that they always, mean that they should. It's because if you've been hurt in a relationship, you might want to evaluate what you want and need in the future, And that can also help in learning from it too. Because sometimes when letting go of your anger isn't enough, you may need to end that relationship as well to free yourself from the anger and pain of what happened. Now, I can honestly say that when I was going through my divorce, I had to free myself. I still, even though, legally on paper, we're no longer together, I had to free myself from that. I had to let it go. Because every situation in life teaches us about ourselves and others, even if they are painful ones. We need to take some time to reflect on what we have learned from whatever situation, you have been through. I know I have took some time to learn from it. I took some time to learn from it. Instead of saying angry, allow yourself to feel the anger in your body. Sometimes we need to be still and feel. That's why it's always good to excuse yourself and have some alone time and feel what you're feeling. We need to feel it. And think about the overall lesson associated with it. What you have learned about yourself. What could you have done differently? Or what will you do differently in the future? So that's everything right there. All of the steps that I said. All of the steps that I said. You need to think before you speak. Right? You need to be healthy in the situation. You need to don't dwell on it. We need to recognize what gets you upset. And then last but not least, we need to learn how to move on and let go. Finally, let go. Because these lessons you learn can help you avoid similar situations down the road. If your anger is so overwhelming now if it's really hard, there are a handful of people out there who are listening to this. I want you to hear this. If this episode resonates with you, and it's really hard for you to overcome, and if your anger is becoming to be overwhelming to where you're trying to figure out what's going on, losing friendships, losing relationships, losing jobs, losing everything or whatever, and that is impacting your life in a negative way. Consider talking to a counselor who can help you learn to manage it. Because, licensed counselors are trained to handle anger and many mental and physical side effects associated with it. All right? So now let's get into the number one tip. The number one tip from, what I got from all of this. When someone does something that hurts you, it's a natural way to, to be angry. It's a natural way to feel angry. But there's a fine line between healthy and unhealthy anger. If you've been holding on to anger for far too long, you're only hurting yourself. So let's keep that 100, y'all. You can learn to realize that anger and enjoy a more enjoyable life. All you need are the right tools. Yes, the right tools. And, the steps that I said and that I stated before, that's all you need. Are some of those tools or all of those tools that's to get you on your way and help you not be angry, not be upset, about anything in your life. All right, guys. So now if you enjoyed, if this episode, if this podcast, if the Creative Lips podcast is something that you are interested in listening to, and you have been listening to me, then by all means, support a sister and leave that 5-star rating. Leave a sister a review. And follow me on all of my social media. Yes, follow me on Instagram at Creative Lips Podcast. And also follow me on Twitter at Creative Lips Pod, because I post stuff there too. Alright guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and yes, learn to let go. Alright guys.
You are now listening to episode 22 of the Creative Lips